I said, out. Officer Miller's voice, a gravelly roar laced with pure, unadulterated malice, echoed off the cheap linoleum. His beefy hand was clamped onto Marcus Cole's worn collar, yanking him halfway out of the booth, a spray of coffee arcing from a violently jostled cup to stain the faded formica. Marcus, a man whose quiet dignity seemed to radiate even through threadbare clothes, grunted, his face tight with pain, but his eyes burned with a fire that Miller, in his blind arrogance, was too stupid to see. He just saw a bum, a nobody, an easy release for whatever poison was curdling inside him that night. The sickening thud of a fist meeting flesh, that's what ripped through the late-night quiet of Henderson's diner, even before the shouting truly began. You see, some men, they get a little bit of power, a shiny badge, and suddenly they think they're kings, entitled to stomp on anyone they decide is beneath them. They forget that every soul has a story, every heart bleeds the same red, and sometimes, the quietest man in the room carries the heaviest thunder. This night, that thunder was about to strike with the force of a hurricane, because they picked the wrong man to mess with, or they picked the very wrong man to try and break. The second officer, Davis, younger, a little greener, shifted his weight nervously by the jukebox, his hand hovering near his belt. He looked like a kid watching a dog fight, half scared, half eager to prove he was tough enough to be there. Come on, old man, just go, Davis mumbled, trying to sound firm but his voice cracking just a little. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're just doing our jobs here, keeping the peace, you know? People want to eat their burgers without this. He gestured vaguely at Marcus, as if his mere presence was a crime against humanity, an affront to decent folk. But Marcus wasn't just this. He was a man, a veteran, someone who had seen real war, real monsters, and these two clowns, puffed up with their small-town authority, they were nothing. Nothing. He tried to speak, his voice raspy, I'm a paying customer. I haven't, but Miller cut him off, shoving him harder against the edge of the table. Paying customer? You think $1.50 for a cup of Joe buys you the right to stink up the place all night? This ain't a flophouse, Grandpa. This is a decent establishment. Or it was, until you dragged your sorry self in here, making everyone uncomfortable. The few other patrons in the diner, a couple huddled in a far booth, a lone trucker nursing a milkshake, they all went silent, ice white, forks frozen midair. Fear, you see, it's a contagious thing. But so is injustice. And what was happening here, it was the rawest kind of injustice, the kind that makes your stomach churn and your fists clench until your knuckles are white. Zara, the waitress, a young woman with kind eyes and a name tag that read, Zara Twainey, she stood frozen behind the counter, her face pale, a dish rack clutched in her white-knuckled hand. She looked like she wanted to scream, to intervene, but the sheer menace rolling off Officer Miller was a physical force, a palpable wave of intimidation. Now, I'm gonna tell you one last time, Miller snarled, his face inches from Marcus's, spit flying with his words, a disgusting display of unhinged aggression. Get your filthy, flea-bitten carcass out of this diner, or I swear to God, I will bounce your head off that pavement so hard you'll be spitting teeth for a week. You think I'm playing? Who? You think I won't do it because there are people watching? He punctuated his threat with another violent shake, Marcus's head snapping back. This wasn't just an arrest, this was a performance, a brutal display of dominance for an audience of frightened onlookers, and Miller was relishing every single moment of his starring role as the town bully. This is how it starts, isn't it? The slide into darkness, the casual cruelty that chips away at a man's soul. A little bit of disrespect, a shove, a threat. Then it escalates. Because men like Miller, they feed on fear. They get bigger, bolder, the more their victim shrinks. But they forgot something crucial about Marcus Cole. He wasn't a shrinker. He was a man who had commanded thousands, a man whose voice had once moved armies. He was a general, though his uniform now was the tattered coat of a forgotten soldier. The moral stakes, they were being etched right there in the spilled coffee and the rising terror, would brutality win? Would a good man be broken by a system that allowed its wolves to prey on the vulnerable? Or would someone, finally say enough? Marcus finally found his voice, and when it came, it was low, dangerously calm, a stillness in the eye of Miller's manufactured storm, a profound quiet that was somehow more threatening than any shout could ever be. "Officer," he began, his eyes locking onto Miller's with an intensity that should have been a warning, a 5-alarm fire klaxon, a sign to back off immediately. "You are making a serious mistake. A mistake you will regret for the rest of your very short career, a mistake that will haunt your waking hours and your dreams." The audacity of it. This, vagrant, threatening him. Miller's face, already ruddy with anger, turned a shade of purple that could curdle milk. He was about to unleash holy hell. You could see it coiling in his shoulders, in the tightening of his jaw. He was a man teetering on the edge of an explosion, ready to detonate. A mistake? Miller choked out, a strangled laugh escaping his lips, a horrible, ugly sound that grated on the nerves of everyone present. "I'm making a mistake? Oh, you are priceless, old man, absolutely priceless. You think you're in a position to tell me about mistakes? Me, the law in this town? You're about to learn what a real mistake looks like when I'm done with you, when I drag you out of here by your hair." He drew back his fist, no longer just restraining, but preparing to strike, to inflict serious pain, to silence this unexpected defiance once and for all. The air crackled. The diner held its breath. And just as that fist was about to fly, just as the point of no return was rushing forward, Marcus Cole did something utterly unexpected. He spoke again, not louder, but with a chilling authority that seemed to come from a place Miller couldn't even comprehend. "Before you compound your error, Officer Miller, badge number 714, Marcus stated, his voice cutting through Miller's rage like a Zogion's scalpel, each word precise and loaded with an unspoken weight. "You should know that I am one phone call away from ending your career and quite possibly putting you in a federal penitentiary. And trust me, it's a call I am very, very prepared to make, a call that will echo in places you can't even imagine." The mention of his badge number, spoken so clearly, so precisely, it was like a splash of ice water. For the first time, a flicker of something other than contempt crossed Miller's face. Was it doubt? Was it a tiny sliver of fear? Or just sheer, unadulterated disbelief that this broken-down old man would dare to issue such an outrageous, impossible threat? The fuse was lit. The dynamite was packed. And the countdown to a career-ending detonation had just begun, all because of a homeless veteran in a greasy spoon diner. What they didn't know was that this wasn't just any veteran, this was a man who had the Pentagon on speed dial, a man whose past was about to collide violently with their prejudiced present. Officer Miller's face, a moment ago a mask of purplish rage, now flickered with something new, a sliver of ugly confusion, a primal uncertainty. That precise badge number, spoken with such cold, hard certainty by this nothing, it burrowed into his thick skull like a maggot. But a bully like Miller, backed into a corner, doesn't deflate, no, he explodes. He recoiled as if slapped, then surged forward again, his voice a guttural bellow of disbelief and fury. "You think you can scare me with that voodoo crap? Federal penitentiary? You old lunatic. You're hallucinating. You're just some bum trying to run a con, and I've had enough of your games." He lunged, not with a professional takedown, but with the sloppy, enraged charge of a barroom brawler. But Marcus, even in his worn state, moved with a ghost of the reflexes that had kept him alive in places Miller only saw in violent video games. He did dodge so much as shift, a subtle pivot, using Miller's own momentum against him. The officer stumbled, his grasping hands finding only air, his bulk nearly sending him crashing into the adjacent booth. It wasn't a fight, it was the effortless deflection of a man who understood combat on a cellular level, a man who had faced down far more terrifying foes than this overfed, overconfident cop. You see, this wasn't the first time Marcus Cole had faced a charging bull head-on, armed with nothing but his wits and the steel in his spine. Years ago, in the dust-choked mountains of a forgotten war, a decorated general stood his ground against an armored vehicle careening towards his men, not with a weapon, but with sheer, unadulterated will, forcing the driver to swerve at the last possible second. That same fire, that same unyielding core, it still burned within him, buried deep beneath layers of hardship and betrayal, but there. Always there. He'd learned then that true power wasn't about the size of your fist, but the strength of your conviction. Officer Davis, watching his partner's clumsy lunge and Marcus's surprising agility, took an involuntary step back. His eyes, wide and darting between Marcus and Miller, betrayed a growing unease. This wasn't going according to the usual script, the script where the vagrant cowered and begged. This old man, he wasn't cowering. He was standing. And there was something in his stance, in the set of his jaw, that screamed of a history Davis couldn't begin to fathom. For a fleeting moment, the younger officer looked less like a cop and more like a frightened spectator who'd stumbled into the wrong arena, realizing the gladiator he'd dismissed was far more dangerous than he appeared. Miller, recovering his balance, his face now a mottled canvas of fury and embarrassment, spun around. You tripped me, you old bastard," he roared, abandoning any pretense of police procedure. This was personal now, his authority challenged, his ego bruised in front of an audience. He was a cornered animal, all teeth and claws, reason long gone out the window. He was about to make another grab for Marcus, his eyes promising a savage retribution, a public humiliation for the men who dared to defy him, who dared to hint at a power beyond his comprehension. But before Miller could act, the narrator in my head, the one that tells you the real story behind the story, wants to show you something. Picture this, General Marcus Cole, 10 years younger, in a starched Class A uniform, medals gleaming like a constellation on his chest. He's in a soundproofed, mahogany-paneled office in the Pentagon, facing down not one, but 3 stone-faced superiors, men with stars on their shoulders and ice in their veins. He'd just presented irrefutable evidence of a massive kickback scheme, a betrayal of trust that funneled millions, billions, meant for soldiers, equipment, into the shadowy pockets of corrupt contractors and their political puppets. He thought he was doing his duty, speaking truth to power. "General Cole," one of them had said, his voice smooth as silk but cold as a viper's kiss, "your zeal is admirable, but misguided. These are complex matters, with national security implications you clearly do not grasp. You are playing with fire, son, and you are going to get burnt if you persist." It wasn't advice, it was a threat, cloaked in the language of concern. Marcus had stood firm, his voice unwavering. "With all due respect, Zeus, the only thing complex here is the web of lies you're spinning to protect thieves. My men and women deserve better. The taxpayers deserve better. I will not back down." That was the day Marcus Cole signed his own career death warrant, the day he chose integrity over advancement, honor over complicity. The system didn't just chew him up, it meticulously, diabolically, set out to erase him. His loyal aide, Major Ana Ramirez, a brilliant young officer who believed in him, who helped him gather the damning files, she was suddenly reassigned to a forgotten outpost in the Arctic, her career effectively frozen. A warning shot. Then came the whispers, the cleverly planted rumors about his mental stability, his erratic behavior. His phone calls went unreturned. Doors that were once wide open slammed shut in his face. And then there was Colonel Jenkins, a man Marcus had mentored, a man he trusted like a brother. Jenkins, it turned out, was the Judas, the weak link who, under pressure or for promise of promotion, had fed information about Marcus's investigation back to the very people they were targeting. That betrayal, it cut Marcus deeper than any bullet ever cut. It was Jenkins who likely provided the final pieces they needed to orchestrate Marcus's downfall, painting him as a rogue element, a danger to the institution he loved. The institution, in turn, protected its corrupt heart by casting him out. So, when Marcus Cole stood in that greasy diner, facing down Officer Miller's thuggish rage, he wasn't just some random homeless man. He was a warrior who had already fought a much bigger, much dirtier war and, in many ways, had lost. He lost his command, his reputation, his financial security. Tide tried to take his pension, tangling it in a Gordian knot of bureaucratic red tape, a final, vindictive twist of the knife. He'd spent what little he had on lawyers, trying to clear his name, trying to fight back, until there was nothing left. He'd become homeless not out of vice or laziness, but because he'd been systematically dismantled by forces far greater than himself. He never told his daughter, Chloe, the full extent of it. She was just starting her life, a young teacher full of hope and idealism. How could he burden her with his ruin, with the knowledge of such profound corruption in the country he'd taught her to revere? So, he'd drifted, carrying the weight of his past, the injustice of it all, like a shroud. He'd ended up in this small, forgotten town, trying to be invisible. But invisibility, it seemed, was not a luxury afforded to men who looked like him, not in a town policed by men like Miller. The escalation in that diner wasn't just about a cup of coffee, it was the culmination of years of being pushed, of being silenced, of being erased. Back in the diner, as Miller prepared to charge again, his face a mask of raw fury, Marcus held up a single, steady hand. Not in surrender, but in a gesture that commanded, "Halt." "Officer Miller," he said, his voice resonating with that same quiet, unbreakable authority that had once hushed rooms filled with powerful men. "I told you I was prepared to make a call. I am now reaching for my phone. I suggest you and your partner consider the implications very carefully before you escalate this situation any further. One call. That's all it will take." He moved slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Miller's, reaching into the inner pocket of his worn jacket. Miller hesitated, his forward momentum stalled by the sheer, unexpected audacity of the old man's calm. The bully in him screamed to attack, to dominate, but that tiny sliver of doubt, that nagging uncertainty Marcus had planted, it was growing. Who was this guy? What if, by some insane, 1,000,000-to-1 chance, he wasn't bluffing? The thought, however fleeting, was enough to make his blood run a little colder, to make his knuckles ache with an indecision he rarely felt. The fight was still raging, but now, it was a battle of wills, a war of nerves, played out in the tense silence of a greasy spoon diner, with careers and futures hanging precariously in the balance. Marcus' hand, steady as a surgeon's, slipped into his worn jacket. Every eye in that diner, from the terrified couple in the corner to Sarah the trainee waitress, now frozen mid-wipe behind the counter, was locked on that simple movement. Officer Miller stood poised, a predator momentarily checked, his brain, sluggish with rage and cheap coffee, trying to process the impossible. This derelict, this piece of street trash, was he actually doing it? Was he actually calling someone who could swat a cop like a fly? The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was almost more offensive to Miller than the physical defiance. It was a challenge to his entire worldview, a world where men like Marcus were dirt beneath his boots, not callers of powerful friends. The silence in the diner stretched taut, thin as a banjo string, ready to snap. You could hear the greasy sizzle from the kitchen, the hum of the ancient fluorescent lights, the frantic thumping of Officer Davis's heart, or maybe that was mine, watching this whole ugly drama unfold. Because in that moment, as Marcus's fingers brushed against an old, battered flip phone, not some fancy smartphone, mind you, but a relic from a bygone era, you knew this was it, this was the pivot. The bluff called, or the ace revealed. And Officer Miller, well, he wasn't a man known for his patience or his poker face. His face was a roadmap of impending violence. "You touch that phone, old man," Miller finally growled, his voice low and menacing, the earlier uncertainty now hardening back into brutal resolve, "and I will break every bone in your hand." "You think I'm stupid? You think I'm going to let you call your imaginary friends to come save you? This isn't a movie. This is my town, my beat, and you, my friend, are trespassing on my last nerve." He took a step closer, his shadow falling over Marcus, trying to intimidate, to dominate through sheer physical presence. He was reasserting his control, or so he thought. But Marcus, he just kept moving, slow and deliberate, his eyes never leaving Miller's. He drew out the ancient flip phone. It looked like it had been through a war itself, scratched and dented, a testament to a life-lived heart. He flipped it open with his thumb, the small screen casting a faint blue glow on his weathered face. There was no fear in his eyes, only a deep, profound weariness, and something else, a flicker of grim satisfaction. He was tired of running, tired of being invisible, tired of being the world's punching bag. If these thugs wanted a fight, if they wanted to see who he was, then by God, he was going to show them. You have to understand something about towns like Northwood, towns that seem sleepy and forgotten on the surface. Beneath that veneer of small-town charm, there's often a whole ecosystem of petty tyrants, secret deals, and unspoken rules. Mayor Beasley, for instance, he wasn't just some folksy politician. He was a man with a voracious appetite for progress, which in his dictionary meant tearing down the old to make way for shiny new developments that lined his pockets and the pockets of his buddies. And to make way for that progress, you had to clean up the town, which meant people like Marcus, the homeless, the marginalized, they became an eyesore, a problem to be swept away. And who do you think helps sweep them away? Cops like Miller. They get a nod and a wink from on high, an unspoken permission to be proactive, to harass and intimidate anyone who doesn't fit the town's new, polished image. Ms. Annalise Jenkins, the town council's sharp-tongued lawyer, she was the architect of the legal framework for this cleansing, crafting ordinances so vague they could be used to target anyone, anytime. It was a neat little system, a conspiracy of convenience, where everyone got what they wanted. Beasley got his developments, Jenkins built her reputation as a tough-as-nails enforcer, and Miller got to indulge his sadistic power trips with impunity. They were all interconnected, a web of local lies designed to maintain their grip on power. So, when Marcus Cole sat there in that diner, about to make a call that could potentially expose this cozy arrangement, he wasn't just confronting two rogue cops. He was, unknowingly, poking a stick into a much larger, much angrier nest. The stakes were higher than anyone in that diner, except perhaps Marcus himself, could possibly imagine. This wasn't just about a wrongful arrest, this was about threatening the carefully constructed illusion of a town on the up and up, an illusion built on the backs of the voiceless and the vulnerable. As Marcus's thumb hovered over the keypad, ready to dial a number that seemed to exist only in his defiant imagination, Officer Miller made his decision. The doubt was gone, replaced by a certainty born of arrogance and a lifetime of getting his own way. This had to be a bluff, a desperate, pathetic attempt by a nobody to save his own skin. And Miller was going to call it heart. "That's it," he roared, lunging forward again, his hand outstretched to snatch the phone, to crush this last act of defiance. "No more games. You're coming with me, now." The diner gasped. Sarah let out a small, stifled scream. Mr. Henderson, the owner, who'd been trying to shrink into the wallpaper behind his counter, flinched as if struck. This was it, the point of no return. But just as Miller's fingers were about to close over the flimsy plastic of the flip phone, a new voice cut through the charged atmosphere, sharp and authoritative, a voice accustomed to being a bait. "Officer Miller. Stand down. Right now." The command was so unexpected, so filled with steely authority, that Miller actually froze mid-lunge, his hand hovering inches from Marcus's phone. Every head in the diner swiveled towards the entrance. Framed in the doorway, looking like Tite just stepped out of a recruitment poster for civic displeasure, stood Mayor Richard Beasley himself, flanked by the ever-present, ever-severe Ms. Annalise Jenkins. Beasley's face was a mask of controlled fury, his eyes promising trouble. Ms. Jenkins, cool and collected as ever, surveyed the scene with the detached air of a biologist examining an uninteresting specimen. Their arrival was a new complication, a massive obstacle dropped squarely in Marcus's path. The local conspiracy had just walked in the door, ready to defend its turf. "What in God's name is going on here, Miller?" Mayor Beasley demanded, his voice tight with annoyance as he strode further into the diner, Ms. Jenkins gliding silently beside him. Mr. Henderson called me, hysterical, talking about a riot in his establishment. I expect my officers to maintain order, not create a public spectacle. And you, he said, his gaze falling on Marcus with undisguised contempt, what's your excuse for disrupting my town's peace? Another freeloader causing trouble for hard-working business owners, I presume? He didn't wait for an answer, already convinced of Marcus's guilt. This, right here, was the antagonist's true nature on full display. Miller's brute force, Beasley's arrogant political maneuvering, Jenkins' cold, calculated disdain for anyone outside her carefully ordered world. They were a trifecta of entrenched power, and Marcus, to them, was just an inconvenience, a piece of grit in their well-oiled machine. They saw his worn clothes, his quiet defiance, and they saw a problem to be managed, swiftly and decisively. They couldn't see the general beneath the rags, couldn't imagine the storm he was about to unleash. The stakes had just been raised to the stratosphere. Marcus wasn't just fighting two cops anymore, he was fighting City Hall itself, and all its shadowy benefactors. And he still hadn't even dialed the damn number. Mayor Beasley's booming voice, dripping with self-importance and righteous indignation, sucked all the remaining oxygen out of Henderson's diner. His arrival, with the icily composed Ms. Jenkins at his side, was like a signal flare for Officer Miller. You could practically see the vindication puff up his chest, the smirk returning to his lips, uglier and more confident than ever. See? His eyes screamed at Marcus. The real power in this town is here now, and Thierry on my side. You're finished, old man. Utterly finished. He visibly relaxed his stance, stepping back slightly to allow the mayor to take center stage, a loyal attack dog now assured of his master's approval. Ms. Jenkins, her sharp eyes cataloging every detail of Marcus's worn appearance, every fleck of dust on his jacket, every line of weariness on his face, offered a small, almost imperceptible nod to Officer Miller. It was a silent acknowledgement, a confirmation that he had done precisely what was expected of him in dealing with such undesirables. Her gaze then flicked to Marcus, dismissing him in an instant as utterly irrelevant, a piece of social detritus unfortunately cluttering up an otherwise orderly establishment. There was no empathy there, no curiosity, just the cold, hard assessment of a problem to be swiftly and efficiently erased. Well, Officer Miller? Mayor Beasley prompted, tapping his foot impatiently, clearly eager to resolve this unseemly disruption and get back to more important mayoral duties, like glad-handing potential investors or admiring his own reflection. What's the report? Why was this individual causing such a disturbance that Mr. Henderson here felt the need to interrupt my evening? We have ordinances, you know. Ordinances Ms. Jenkins worked very hard to draft, to ensure our town remains a pleasant and welcoming place for law-abiding citizens and valued businesses. His emphasis on law-abiding and valued was a clear, deliberate exclusion of Marcus. This was it. The moment where the system closes ranks, where the powerful protect their own, and where the lone voice of dissent, the inconvenient truth, gets crushed under the polished heel of officialdom. Marcus Cole was now facing not just a bully with a badge, but the full weight of a town administration deeply invested in maintaining its pristine, if wholly fabricated, image. He was being pushed to his absolute limit, every escape route seemingly cut off, every avenue of appeal blocked by the very people meant to ensure justice. The air grew thick with their collective disapproval, their unspoken verdict already rendered, guilty of being poor, of being an inconvenience, of daring to exist in their sanitized world. Officer Miller, emboldened by the mayoral presence, launched into his version of events, a masterpiece of self-serving exaggeration and outright lies. He painted Marcus as an aggressive, uncooperative vagrant who had been verbally abusive, had resisted lawful orders, and had even, he claimed with a dramatic flourish, threatened him and Officer Davis. He was babbling about making phone calls to the Pentagon, Mayor Miller said, shaking his head with faint pity. Clearly disturbed. We were just trying to remove him peacefully when he became agitated and, well, you see the mess. He conveniently omitted his own violence, his own stream of vitriol, his own blatant abuse of power. You could almost admire the shamelessness of it, if it wasn't so disgusting, so utterly infuriating. It was a classic case of the abuser playing the victim, a tactic as old as time, and one that people in power often employ with sickening effectiveness. And Mayor Beasley, he lapped it up, nodding gravely, his expression hardening further as he looked at Marcus. Ms. Jenkins, meanwhile, was already mentally drafting the official report, one that would commend Officer Miller for his restraint and professionalism in the face of a clearly unstable individual. The consequence of Miller's past actions? In this town, with these enablers, it seemed there were no negative consequences for him, only promotions and quiet praise. This, for Marcus, was the true breaking point. Not the physical abuse, not the insults, but this calm, calculated, public annihilation of truth. He had faced down enemies on the battlefield, men who wanted to kill him, but this slow, bureaucratic strangulation of justice, this casual dismissal of his humanity by people who preened themselves on their civic virtue, this was a different kind of hell. An emotional breakdown? No, Marcus Cole wasn't the type to weep or scream in public. His breakdown was quieter, internal, a sudden, crushing wave of utter desolation, the stark realization that perhaps, just perhaps, he truly was alone in this fight, that the system was too rotten, too powerful, too indifferent to ever be challenged by one broken man. That all is lost moment settled over him like a suffocating blanket. What was the point of the phone call now? Even if he reached General Peterson, even if the heavens themselves opened up, would these people listen? Or would they just spin it, dismiss it, bury it under another mountain of self-serving lies and carefully worded denials? He looked at their faces, Miller's smug triumph, Beasley's pompous disdain, Jenkins' glacial indifference, and for the first time that night, a flicker of true despair, of utter hopelessness, touched his soul. His shoulders, which had remained defiantly straight, slumped, just a fraction, but enough for the narrator in my heart to feel a pang of genuine sorrow. This is how they break you, I thought. Not with a bang, but with the slow, grinding erosion of your will to fight back. Mayor Beasley, sensing victory, sensing the old man's spirit finally cracking, stepped forward, his voice now a parody of paternal concern. All recht, son, he said, though Marcus was clearly his elder. We had your little episode. No real harm done, thanks to the quick thinking of our fine officers. Now, why don't you just come along quietly? We'll find you a place to rest. Get you some help, perhaps. The offer of help was a thinly veiled threat of institutionalization, of being disappeared into the system, another problem neatly solved and forgotten. This was the ultimate humiliation, being treated like a child, like a madman, his agency, his very sanity, dismissed with a condescending pat on the head. Ms. Jenkins then added her 2 cents, her voice precise and devoid of any emotion. Technically, Mayor, under Ordnance 7.34, subsection B, his continued presence here, after being asked to leave by the proprietor and by law enforcement, constitutes defiant trespass. And his earlier statements, if Officer Miller's report is accurate, could be construed as making terroristic threats, however delusional. She was laying the legal groundwork for his complete and utter subjugation, wrapping their cruelty in the neat, tidy bow of legal jargon. The consequences of Marcus simply trying to exist, of trying to assert his basic rights, were now being painted as criminal acts. But just as Marcus felt himself sinking, just as the last ember of fight was about to be extinguished by the suffocating weight of their combined authority, something happened. Zara, the young trainee waitress, who had been watching this whole horrifying spectacle with white, tear-filled eyes, she let out a small, involuntary sob. It wasn't loud, but in the sudden lull, it was audible. And that tiny sound, that pure, unadulterated expression of human empathy, it seemed to pierce through the wall of Marcus's despair. He looked over at her, saw her genuine distress, her helpless anger on his behalf. And in her eyes, he saw a reflection of the injustice, a spark of the fight he was about to abandon. It was a revelation, not a grand, earth-shattering one, but a quiet, profound realization: he wasn't completely alone. Someone saw. Someone cared. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Enough to try. Enough to make that one last stand, consequences be damned. The all is lost moment began to recede ever so slightly. The setup for the eventual comeback, however improbable, however slim the chance, was being laid not by a change in his circumstances, but by a change within him, a rekindling of that indomitable spirit that had defined his entire life. He straightened his shoulders again, that fractional slump disappearing as if it had never been. The weariness was still there, but the despair was being pushed back, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He looked Mayor Beasley dead in the eye. "I am not your son, Mayor," he said, his voice quiet but regaining its steely edge. "I am not delusional. And I am not going anywhere with you or your officers until I make one phone call." He held up the battered flip phone, his thumb now resolutely on the call button. "You can try and stop me. You can add unlawful restraint and assault to the charges your officer Miller is already facing. But I will make this call. You can all bear witness." The fight was back on. His spirit, though battered and bruised, was not broken. He was going down swinging, one way or another. The crucible had not consumed him, it had only forged him harder. Marcus Cole's words, "I will make this call," hung in the greasy air of Henderson's diner like the prelude to an execution. His thumb, gnarled and weathered but steady as a rock, pressed down on the call button of that ancient flip phone. The small, tinny sound of the phone attempting to connect, a series of faint beeps, was like a starter pistol firing in the dead silence. Mayor Beasley's jaw, which had been set in a mask of pompous authority, actually dropped. M.S. Jenkins' perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched a fraction higher, a silent testament to her disbelief at such flagrant insubordination. "And Officer Miller?" Oh, Officer Miller looked like he was about to spontaneously combust, his face turning a truly alarming shade of crimson. "Why, you insubordinate old fool!" Miller finally exploded, his voice cracking with rage, lunging forward with renewed ferocity, all semblance of police decorum, if he ever possessed any, utterly abandoned. "I told you. No cause. You're under arrest. Resisting. Assaulting an officer with your defiance." He was flailing now, both verbally and physically, trying to snatch the phone, to silence Marcus, to regain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his thuggish comprehension. He was a drowning man grasping at straws, his authority revealed as nothing more than a bully's bluster when faced with true, unshakable resolve. But Marcus was ready. He wasn't a young man, and years of hardship had taken their toll, yet a lifetime of discipline, of knowing how to use his body, how to anticipate an opponent, that hadn't entirely faded. He shielded the phone with his body, turning, absorbing Miller's clumsy charge on his shoulder, grunting with the impact but not yielding the precious device. It was a desperate dance, a struggle not for freedom, but for the simple act of communication, a fight to make one single call that he believed, that he knew, could change everything. Officer Davis, younger, conflicted, made a hesitant move as if to help Miller, then stopped, his eyes wide with a dawning horror at the sheer unprofessionalism, the raw brutality of his partner's attack. "Mayor! Stop him!" Miller shrieked, grappling with Marcus, their bodies knocking against the table, sending salt and pepper shakers flying. He's crazy. He'll call in a bomb threat or something. He's a menace." Beasley, for all his bluster, looked momentarily paralyzed, clearly unaccustomed to such raw, physical altercations outside of heavily edited campaign commercials. M.S. Jenkins, however, reacted with cold precision. "Officer Davis," she commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos like a shard of ice, "assist your partner. Subdue the individual. Confiscate that device. Now." She was all business, her words a clear directive to escalate, to crush this rebellion by any means necessary. And just as Davis, spurred by Jenkins' command, was about to throw himself into the fray, just as Miller's fingers were about to close around Marcus's wrist, a voice came from the small, tinny speaker of the flip phone. It was faint at first, distorted by the struggle, but it was undeniably there. A crisp, professional voice, cutting through the static and the shouting. Pentagon Secure Line, Operator Ziebter, to whom am I speaking? The words, though quiet, landed like a tactical strike in the heart of the diner. Everything, absolutely everything, Folze. Miller's grasping hand stopped. Davis froze mid-step. Beasley's mouth hung agape. Jenkins' eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine surprise, perhaps even alarm, finally piercing her icy composure. Marcus, breathing heavily, his body aching from the assault, pressed the phone tighter to his ear. This is General Marcus Cole, he managed, his voice raspy but firm. Authentication code, Archangel 77 Actual. I need to speak with General Michael Peterson. Immediately. It is a matter of extreme personal urgency and potential national security interest involving compromised local authority. He rattled off the authentication code with the fluency of a man who had spoken such codes 1,000 times before, a secret language that unlocked doors to unimaginable power. The term, General Marcus Cole, spoken by Marcus himself into that phone, echoed in the sudden, deathly silence of the diner. You could have heard a pin drop on the greasy floor. General Marcus Cole? The name meant nothing to these small-town tyrants, not yet. But, Pentagon Secure Line? Authentication code? General Michael Peterson? Those phrases, they carried a weight, a gravitas, that even their insulated, arrogant minds could begin to process. This wasn't the babbling of a lunatic. This was the precise, professional language of a man who knew exactly who he was calling, and who expected to be hurt. The script hadn't just been flipped, it had been shredded, inside-outed, and rewritten in lightning. Officer Miller slowly, almost comically, unhanded Marcus. His face, which had been contorted with rage, was now slack with utter, uncomprehending shock. He looked at the battered flip phone as if it were an alien artifact, something capable of summoning demons. Officer Davis just stared, pale and trembling, at Marcus, a new kind of respect, mingled with sheer terror, dawning in his eyes. Mayor Beasley swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing convulsively in his throat. He exchanged a wild, panicked glance with Ms. Jenkins. She, for the first time, looked genuinely rattled, her composure fractured, her mind clearly racing to calculate the implications of this utterly unforeseen, game-changing development. One moment, General Cole, the operator's voice replied from the phone, calm and efficient. Patching you through to General Peterson's direct secure channel. Please hold. General Cole. The operator had confirmed this wasn't a delusion. This was real. The man they had been abusing, dismissing, attempting to crush, was, or had been, a general. A 4-star, Pentagon-level, decision-making, war-fighting general. The revelation hung in the air, thick and suffocating, a truth so enormous it threatened to implode their petty little world of corruption and abuse. The silence stretched, punctuated only by Marcus's steady breathing and the faint, almost imperceptible static from the open line. Then, another voice, deeper, more authoritative, instantly recognizable to anyone who had ever served at the highest echelons of the United States military, crackled through the small speaker. Marcus? Marcus, is that really you? My God, man, what in the blazes is going on? Your authentication just lit up my entire command center like a Christmas tree. Are you all right? Talk to me, son. The voice was filled with genuine concern, with urgency, and with an unmistakable undercurrent of immense, coiled power. This was E.T. The plot twist delivered with the force of a bunker-busting bomb. The homeless man, the vagrant, the nuisance, was on a first-name basis with a 4-star general at the Pentagon, a general who sounded not just like a colleague, but like a concerned friend, a mentor. Unexpected character connections? This was a connection that could shake the foundations of their corrupt little town and send shockwaves all the way to Washington, D.C. New allies? Marcus had just summoned the full might of the United States military to his side with one desperate phone call. Maximum dramatic tension? Oh, it was so thick you could cut it with a combat knife. Marcus took a deep, steadying breath. "Mike," he said, his voice now filled with a profound weariness but also a renewed strength, the strength of a man who, against all odds, had finally reached friendly lines. "It's a long story, old friend. A very long, very ugly story. Right now, I'm in a diner in Northwood. And I'm being, rather aggressively detained by the local constabulary and their mayor, who seem to believe I'm a public nuisance rather than a paying customer. Or a retired general officer of the United States Army." He let that last part hang in the air, a final, damning indictment. The game hadn't just changed, it was over. And the home team, the bullies and the petty tyrants of Northwood, they had just lost in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. Their faces were a study in abject horror. The moment Marcus finished speaking to General Mike Peterson, the last words, "retired general officer of the United States Army," echoing like a judge's gavel in the stunned silence of Henderson's diner, you could practically hear the careers of Officer Ron Miller, Mayor Richard Beasley, and MS Annalise Jenkins shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Their faces were a symphony of dawning horror. Miller looked like he'd been poleaxed, his mouth working silently, his eyes white and vacant as if staring into the abyss of his own ruined future. Beasley, the pompous mayor, went a ghastly shade of pale, his jowls quivering, his eyes darting around like a cornered rat searching for an escape hatch that simply didn't exist. And MS Jenkins, the Ice Queen, the master manipulator of legal loopholes and bureaucratic oppression? Even her glacial composure finally cracked. A visible tremor ran through her knuckles white as she gripped her expensive leather briefcase. Her mind, usually a steel trap of calculated responses, was clearly scrambling, trying to find a countermove, a legal strategy, a way to spin this unmitigated disaster, but coming up terrifyingly, utterly blank. For the first time, she looked not like a predator, but like prey, realizing the hunter she'd been toying with was, in fact, a far more formidable beast than she could have ever imagined, one with very, very big friends. General Peterson's voice, amplified by the cheap speaker of Marcus's flip phone, boomed into the diner again, now stripped of all pleasantries, cold and hard as Arctic steel. "Marcus, you stay right where you are. Do not move. Do not let those individuals lay another hand on you. I am, as we speak, on a direct line to the governor of this state, the Attorney General, and the FBI special agent in charge of the nearest field office. I am also dispatching a security detail from Fort Bragg. They will be there within hours. Your exact location is already triangulated from this call. Is anyone there armed and threatening you right now?" The sheer, unadulterated power in that voice, the calm, swift enumeration of actions being taken at the highest levels, it was like a physical blow to the cowering local authorities. Governor? Attorney General? FBI? Fort Bragg Security Detail? This wasn't just a complaint, this was an avalanche. This was the full weight of the federal government and the United States military coming down like a ton of bricks on their corrupt little fiefdom. Officer Miller actually whimpered, a pathetic little sound that was a stark contrast to his earlier violent roars. He looked like he was about to be physically sick all over Mr. Henderson's freshly mopped floor. "Marcus," his voice steady, though laced with the fatigue of his ordeal, replied, "the two officers are armed, General. Officer Miller has already assaulted me. Mayor Beasley and MS Jenkins here have been complicit in their attempts to unlawfully detain and silence me." He wasn't shouting, he wasn't demanding, he was simply stating facts, each word a nail in their collective coffins. The underdog, just moments ago on the verge of being crushed, was now calmly directing the deployment of forces that could dismantle their entire world. His strength wasn't in newfound aggression, but in the quiet, righteous power of truth finally being backed by overwhelming force. Understood, Marcus, General Peterson's voice bit back, colder than a crypt. Put your phone on speaker, son, and hold it up so those officials can hear me clearly. Marcus did as instructed, the volume surprisingly loud from the battered device. This is General Michael Peterson, United States Army, speaking under direct authority of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Mayor Beasley, Officer Miller, MS Jenkins, and any other local authority present, you are hereby ordered to stand down. Do not approach General Cole. Do not attempt to impede his liberty in any way. You are to await the arrival of state and federal authorities who will take charge of this situation. Any failure to comply will be met with the severest possible consequences under the Uniform Code of Military Justice and federal law. Is that understood? The silence that followed was so profound, so absolute, you could have heard a gnat cough. Mayor Beasley, his face glistening with a sheen of terrified sweat, could only manage a series __ of convulsive nods, his voice utterly failing him. Miss Jenkins, her legal mind no doubt screaming about jurisdiction and due process, knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that arguing with a four-star general invoking national security and the safety of a fellow officer was a battle she could not, would not, win. Her fight now was for her own survival, to distance herself from the rapidly sinking ship of Beasley's administration and Miller's brutality. Officer Miller, however, seemed to be in a state of catatonic shock. He just stood there, swaying slightly, his eyes glazed over. The fight had completely drained out of him, replaced by a terror so profound it was almost pitiable. Almost. But then you remembered his earlier sadism, his gleeful abuse of power, and pity withered on the vine. This wasn't just his downfall beginning, this was karma arriving special delivery, expressed directly from the Pentagon. The reckoning had begun, not with a whisper, but with a thunderclap that rattled the very foundations of their corrupt little world. The truth-telling moments were coming thick and fast. General Peterson wasn't done. Officer Miller, his voice boomed from the phone, I am also being informed, as we speak, of your rather extensive disciplinary record. Multiple complaints of excessive force, racial profiling, and intimidation, all conveniently overlooked by your superiors and the mayor's office. It seems your little reign of terror in Northwood is about to come to a very public and very ignominious end. You might want to start thinking about finding a good lawyer. A very, very good one. This was E.T. The direct confrontation. The exposure of the systematic cover-ups that had allowed Miller to operate unchecked for so long. Mayor Beasley flinched as if physically struck by Peterson's words. He knew that his own complicity in burying those complaints, in protecting Miller to ensure he had a loyal goon to enforce his will, was about to be dragged out into the harsh, unforgiving light of a federal investigation. His attempts to bluster, to use his political connections, they were dissolving like mist in the face of this onslaught. His fight was over before it even began. And so, the underdog, Marcus Cole, stood there, no longer an underdog but a symbol of a justice too long deferred, now arriving with a vengeance. He didn't gloat. He didn't sneer. He simply watched, his expression a mixture of profound sorrow for what his country had allowed to happen, and a grim satisfaction that, finally, accountability was dawning. He was finding his strength not in revenge, but in the restoration of order, in the assertion that no one, not even a forgotten, homeless veteran, should be treated with such contempt, such cruelty, by those sworn to protect and serve. The balance of power hadn't just shifted, it had been utterly and irrevocably inverted. The diner, once a scene of brutal harassment, had become a crucible where careers were ending and a reckoning was beginning. Zara, the waitress, was openly crying now, tears of relief and a kind of odd disbelief. Mr. Henderson, the owner, looked like he wanted to both cheer and faint simultaneously. Even the other patrons, who had been frozen in fear, were now whispering excitedly, their phones once again out, not to record an abuse, but to document a stunning, almost unbelievable, victory of justice. The climactic showdown was still to come, the full extent of the conspiracy still to be unraveled, but the first, decisive battle had been won. And the casualties were the careers and reputations of those who had so arrogantly abused their power just minutes before. The hammer had fallen, and it had fallen hard. The minutes that crawled by after General Peterson's thunderous pronouncements from that tiny flip phone felt like an eternity inside Henderson's diner. The air was thick with unspoken fear, with the stench of careers imploding, of lives irrevocably altered. Officer Miller had slumped into a nearby booth, his head in his hands, no longer a threatening presence but a deflated sack of arrogant flesh, muttering incoherently about misunderstandings and bad luck. Mayor Beasley, his face the color of old parchment, paced a tiny, frantic circle near the counter, occasionally whispering hoarsely to Miss Jenkins, who stood ramrod straight, her expression a mask of icy control, though her eyes darted towards the diner's entrance with a frequency that betrayed her profound unease. The fight, for them, had morphed into a desperate, silent prayer for a miracle that wasn't coming. Marcus Cole, however, stood with a quiet dignity that seemed to fill the small space. The exhaustion was still etched on his face, but beneath it, a profound strength, a resilient core, had reasserted itself. He had faced down the bullies, stared into the abyss of their petty power, and had, against all odds, summoned a righteous storm. He wasn't pacing, he wasn't gloating, he was simply being, a calm epicenter in the swirling chaos of their downfall. He had made his stand, spoken his truth, and now, the gears of a justice far greater than Northwood's corrupt machinery were grinding into motion. His fight was now to bear witness, to ensure the process unfolded as it should. Then, the flashing lights. First one set, then two, then a veritable constellation of blue and red slicing through the late-night gloom outside the diner windows, painting the shocked faces within in strobing, dramatic hues. Doors slammed. Urgent, professional voices could be heard. This wasn't the local backup Miller might have once hoped for, this was something far more significant. The cavalry had arrived, not with bugles and waving flags, but with the grim efficiency of state and federal power making its presence known. The final confrontation, the public stripping away of ill-gotten authority, was about to begin. The diner door swung open with a decisive shove, and in walked not one or two, but a phalanx of stern-faced individuals. Two were state troopers, their uniforms crisp, their expressions impassive. Behind them, two more, dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits that screamed, "Federal agent," louder than any badge ever could. One of the agents, a tall woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, scanned the room, her gaze briefly assessing Marcus with a nod of professional respect before locking onto the cowering figures of Miller, Beasley, and Jenkins. This was it. The complete role reversal, played out for all to see. The hunters had become the hunted. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Price, FBI," the woman announced, her voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight of authority that made Mayor Beasley visibly shrink. "And this is Special Agent Mark Donovan. We've been in communication with General Peterson and the Attorney General's office." "General Cole," she said, turning to Marcus and addressing him with formal respect, "are you unharmed, sir? Do you require any immediate medical attention?" The genuine concern, the acknowledgement of his rank. It was a public restoration of the dignity that Miller and his cronies had tried so viciously to strip away. Marcus simply inclined his head. "I'm all right, Agent Price. Thank you." A little battered, perhaps, but intact. His voice, though quiet, resonated with the authority they now all recognized. The fight was no longer his to wage physically or verbally, it was now in the capable hands of the system he had, in his darkest hour, still found a way to trust, to activate. He had set the dominoes in motion, and now they were falling with spectacular, unstoppable momentum. Agent Price nodded again, then turned her steely gaze upon Officer Miller. "Officer Ronald Miller," she stated, her voice devoid of any inflection, "you are being detained pending a full federal investigation into multiple allegations of civil rights violations, assault, and obstruction of justice. Please stand, place your hands behind your back." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Miller, looking utterly broken, his face a mask of disbelief and terror, could only comply, his movements sluggish, as if his limbs were made of lead. One of the state troopers stepped forward efficiently, a pair of handcuffs glinting under the diner lights. The click of those cuffs snapping shut was the loudest sound in the world, a definitive full stop to Miller's reign of terror. Mayor Beasley started to bluster, a last, pathetic attempt to assert his imagined authority. "Now see here, Agent Price," he began, his voice trembling. "I am the mayor of this town. These are my officers. You can't just come in here and," Agent Donovan, who until now had been a silent, imposing presence, cut him off, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Mr. Beasley, with all due respect, your authority in this particular matter is, shall we say, under review. We have credible information, corroborated at the highest levels, suggesting a pattern of corruption, abuse of power, and obstruction of justice emanating from your office and involving your police department. We'd advise you to remain silent and cooperative. It would be unweise to do otherwise." All secrets revealed, all lies exposed, or at least, the process had begun with brutal efficiency. The carefully constructed facade of Northwood's respectable governance was being ripped away, revealing the rotten core beneath. Ms. Annalise Jenkins, ever the lawyer, attempted a different, more nuanced tack. "Agents," she began, her voice regaining a sliver of its former composure, "while this situation is indeed unfortunate, I assure you the town of Northwood will cooperate fully with any legitimate inquiry. However, certain protocols must be observed regarding jurisdiction and the rights of." Agent Price cut her off with a raised hand, a gesture of polite but absolute dismissal. "Ms. Jenkins, your name, and that of your brother, Colonel Robert Jenkins, have also surfaced in connection with certain historical irregularities concerning federal contracts and the subsequent, questionable treatment of whistleblowers, one of whom happens to be General Cole. Your passionate involvement in certain local ordinances also appears to have a rather convenient overlap with these past events. A federal subpoena for your records, and for you to provide testimony, is already being drawn up. Perhaps you should consult your own legal counsel, Ms. Jenkins. Immediately." The finality of it, the sheer, inescapable weight of federal power, was crushing. Jenkins' face, for a moment, registered something akin to panic before her mask of professional detachment slammed back into place, but the damage was done. The carefully hidden connections, the secret agendas, were being dragged into the unforgiving light. Dramatic justice wasn't just knocking on their door, it had kicked the door down and was now rearranging the furniture. The patrons of the diner, along with Sarah and Mr. Henderson, watched in stunned, almost reverent silence as the once untouchable power brokers of their town were systematically dismantled, their authority dissolving like sugar in hot water. The climactic showdown wasn't a blaze of gunfire, it was a meticulous, legal, and public execution of careers and reputations built on lies and abuse. Officer Miller was quietly escorted out of the diner by the state troopers, his head bowed in shame, the flash of a news camera from a reporter who'd just arrived outside momentarily illuminating his defeated face. Mayor Beasley was politely but firmly informed that he was not to leave town, that his offices were being sealed, and that a team of auditors would be arriving in the morning. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Ms. Jenkins, after a brief, hushed conversation with Agent Price, nodded curtly and made a call on her own phone, her voice low and urgent, presumably to the best defense attorney money could buy. Marcus Cole watched it all, not with triumph, but with a profound, sorrowful gravitas. This was not a victory he had sought, but a consequence they had brought upon themselves. As Agent Price approached him again, offering him a bottle of water and assuring him of his safety and any assistance he required, the complete role reversal was cemented. The man they had sought to eject, to silence, to break, was now the calm center of a federal operation, treated with deference and respect, while his tormentors were stripped of their power, their dignity, their futures. The stage was now perfectly set for the final, crucial lesson to be drawn from this night of chaos and reckoning. And so, as the first pale fingers of dawn began to paint the dingy windows of Henderson's diner with streaks of gray and hesitant gold, the immediate storm had passed. Officer Miller, stripped of his badge and his bravado, was gone, a ghost in the federal system. Mayor Beasley, his political ambitions and corrupt schemes laid bare, was a broken man awaiting the inevitable legal guillotine. Ms. Annalise Jenkins, the architect of so much local misery and a silent partner in a deeper, older treachery, was finally facing a reckoning that no amount of legal maneuvering could forestall. The air in the diner, once thick with menace and injustice, now felt strangely cleansed, lighter, as if a malignant tumor had been excised. Marcus Cole, no longer the vagrant or the old man, but General Cole, a name now spoken with hushed awe and profound respect by the remaining shell-shocked onlookers, sat quietly at the counter. Agent Price had insisted he have a fresh, hot coffee and something to eat, a small gesture of normalcy after a night that was anything but. He looked tired, yes, bone-weary from the ordeal and the years of hardship that had preceded it, but there was a new light in his eyes, a flicker of peace, perhaps, or maybe just the grim satisfaction of a battle hard-fought and, against all odds, undeniably won. His fight hadn't been for revenge, but for respect, for the simple acknowledgement of his humanity, and in that, he had triumphed spectacularly. So what's the takeaway from this night of fire and fury, this collision of arrogance and integrity? What's the moral etched into the very fabric of this story, a lesson that should resonate in every heart, in every town, in every encounter we have? It's this, plain and simple, yet so often forgotten: never, ever, judge a life by the uniform it wears, or the uniform it doesn't wear. For beneath the tattered coat of a homeless man can beat the heart of a general, a hero, a leader of men who has walked through hells you can't even imagine. And beneath the starched collar of authority can fester the rotten soul of a bully, a tyrant, a petty god drunk on unearned power. Think about Officer Miller. He saw Marcus's worn clothes, his quiet demeanor, and his prejudice kicked in like a rabid dog. He saw weakness, an easy target, a chance to flex his pathetic muscles and feel like a big man. He did see the years of service, the strategic mind, the unwavering courage that had defined Marcus Cole's entire existence. He saw only what he wanted to see, what his own twisted ego needed to see. And that blindness, that willful ignorance, was the architect of his downfall. He sowed disrespect, and he reaped utter ruin. His career, his pension, his freedom all gone, sacrificed on the altar of his own arrogance. He's serving a hefty sentence now, a convicted felon, a cautionary tale whispered in police academies about how not to be. And Mayor Richard Beasley? He was so enamored with his vision of a clean and progressive Northwood, so focused on attracting wealthy developers and stroking his own ego, that he forgot the first duty of any leader: to serve all the people, not just the ones who looked good in a promotional brochure. He enabled Miller's thuggery because it served his purpose, sweeping the undesirables out of sight. But what goes around, it truly does come around. The federal investigation into his administration unearthed a cesspool of corruption, kickbacks, illicit deals, obstruction of justice. His impeachment was swift, his trial a public humiliation, and his current residence is a federal correctional facility. He wanted a legacy, he got a mugshot and a permanent stain on his family name. Ms. Annalise Jenkins, the cold, calculating lawyer, she learned a harsh lesson too. She believed the law was a tool to be wielded, a weapon to protect her interests and the dark secrets of her family, including her brother, Colonel Jenkins, whose betrayal had set Marcus on his downward spiral years ago. The colonel, facing his own demons and irrefutable evidence, eventually cooperated fully, implicating a network that reached into the highest echelons of power and finance, a network his sister had, perhaps unwittingly at first, then with increasing awareness, helped to shield through her aggressive local policies. Anneliese was disbarred, her reputation shredded. She faces ongoing investigations, her life a testament to the truth that cleverness without a conscience is just a more sophisticated form of villainy. But what about those who showed a flicker of humanity in that darkness? Officer Davis, Miller's younger, more hesitant partner, he made a choice. He was complicit at first, yes, too afraid or too weak to stand up to Miller's bullying. But when the walls came crashing down, he chose truth. He testified against Miller, against Beasley, detailing the culture of fear and corruption. His law enforcement career was over, of course, and he faced his own legal consequences, but he's on a path to redemption, speaking out, trying to make amends. He learned that silence in the face of evil makes you a partner to it, but even late, the truth can begin to set you free. And Sarah, the trainee waitress with the kind eyes, the one whose small sob of empathy helped rekindle Marcus's fighting spirit? Her bravery, her simple human decency in wanting to protect a vulnerable man, it didn't go unnoticed. The patrons who filmed the incident, their footage going viral, hailed her as a quiet hero. A scholarship fund was set up in her name by a grateful community, now awakened to the injustices that had festered in their midst. She's in college now, studying social work, determined to be a voice for those who have none. She proved that even the smallest act of courage can light a beacon in the darkest night. Mr. Henderson, the diner owner, shamed by his initial fear but inspired by Marcus and Sarah, now hosts a weekly veterans breakfast, a small but meaningful gesture of respect. As for General Marcus Cole, the man at the center of the storm, his name was cleared with full honors. His back pay and pension were restored, along with a formal, public apology from the Department of Defense for the grievous injustice he had suffered years before. But he didn't seek a return to the corridors of power. He didn't want parades or accolades. Instead, with the quiet dignity that was his hallmark, he used his resources to establish the Cole Foundation for Dignity and Respect, an organization dedicated to advocating for homeless veterans and fighting the systemic abuses that leave so many forgotten heroes out in the cold. He understood that true strength isn't about the stars on your shoulder, but the integrity in your soul. He found his new mission, not in commanding armies, but in lifting up the fallen. So, the lesson echoes, clear and undeniable: treat every human being as if they are royalty in disguise, for you never know the battles TV fought, the crowns TV earned, or the silent power they hold. Do not let prejudice blind you. Do not let arrogance deafen you. Do not let the pursuit of power corrupt your soul. Because one day, the person you dismiss, the one you trample, the one you deem insignificant, might just be the one who holds the phone that can call down the thunder, the one whose quiet whisper can unravel your entire world. Our call to action then, the enduring message from that night in Henderson's diner, is this: be the Sarah who shows compassion. Be the Davis who eventually chooses truth over complicity. Be the Marcus Cole who, even in the face of overwhelming odds, refuses to let his spirit be extinguished. Stand up to bullies, whether they wear a badge or a suit or a crown. Challenge injustice wherever you find it, in your homes, in your workplaces, in your communities. And always, always, look beyond the surface, for the true measure of a person is not found in their worldly possessions or their outward appearance, but in the content of their character and the courage of their convictions. Fight for that. Every single day. That's how we honor the sacrifices of true heroes, and build a world where no one has to make that one desperate call for help.